who have joined us on Zoom. Please feel free to leave a question in the chat. You can send that to me directly. My name is Stephanie Sessler with the YAA. So we'll give everybody just a few minutes to join us here. This is, I think, maybe the fourth of our Yale Alumni Live series, where the regional clubs team has been bringing alumni on to share their expertise or tell us stories or entertain us with musical selections. So we're really pleased to be able to bring this content to a live forum, to be here on Zoom and on Facebook Live. So we'll give everyone just a minute to join us. I see a few more people popping into the Zoom, and hopefully we've got some folks watching in Facebook. I will be monitoring those comments in Facebook if anybody has any questions for Tara. Same thing goes for Zoom. And I see somebody's asking about Facebook. We should be live now. There's a little bit of a lag between Zoom and Facebook, so try not to do both at the same time like me, because then you'll be confused. But we're really happy to have all of you here today and to have a really wonderful presenter for us. So I think we'll get going, Tara, and it is my pleasure to introduce Tara Falcone. She is Yale College class of 2011. She is the founder of ReisUP. She's a certified financial planner and a CFA who is super passionate about helping people manage their personal finances. So just a reminder that if you are in Zoom watching us, you can feel free to write a question into the chat and send it directly to me. Or if you are watching live on Facebook, feel free to put it in the comments. So thank you again for being here. Without further ado, take it away, Tara.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just realized I forgot to include one thing in my bio, which is that I am actually a board member on the YAA Board of Governors as well. So representing the younger classes, making sure that we're having programming for all of us young alumni as well. And just want to say thank you to everybody who submitted questions ahead of time. I think we're going to start with those just because we have them. But as Stephanie said, make sure to drop them in the chat or leave a comment below if you're joining us from Facebook, and we'll try to get to those if we can. So the first one I want to start with is actually submitted from a YAA staff member. And they said, I'm ready to start doing more with my money. What's next after a high interest savings account? So I love these kinds of fundamental, like building blocks questions, because it's sort of where everybody starts. It's like, okay, I have some money. Now what do I do with it? And so if you're not familiar, high interest savings account, also called a high yield savings account, are savings accounts that basically offer you higher than normal or higher than kind of the traditional banks offer interest rates on your money. But because of that, there are usually some restrictions about how long it has to be locked up there, how many transactions you can make every month, things like that. But by sacrificing those things, you get a higher yield on your cash. And that's really meant to house like your emergency fund. So money that you have set aside for things that, you know, just kind of come up like COVID-19 that you need to cover. And also any shorter term goals that you might be saving for. So after you have that in place, which is recommended to be roughly 3 to 6 months worth of your fixed expenses, then the next question is really like, do you have any debt? If you have consumer debt, especially credit cards or any high yield or high interest rate auto loans, you should consider paying those off as well. But once you have that safety net in place and you're not heavily indebted, then I believe your next focus should really be retirement and starting to save for that because it's like the longest, biggest financial task that you'll ever have to complete. And it's going to take you the longest to actually get there to be successful. So how to do that would be create a plan, calculate how much you'll need to retire. There's lots of different ways to do that. One is multiplying your income by 25, and that's sort of your rough nest egg number. There are more accurate ways to do it using inflation adjustments and things like that. But just to give you an idea, you can multiply the income you'd like to live off of every year by 25. And then make sure you're contributing enough every year to reach that goal and that you're invested or allocated properly in your retirement account. So that's where I think you should start next. Once you have that safety net, then make sure you're taking care of future you by putting money into retirement accounts today that you can live off of tomorrow. And then after that, other investments, if you know, once you've got your retirement stuff in place, then you can start looking at things like a taxable brokerage account or a personal account. I'm sure you've heard of like investing apps like Robinhood or Webull or M1 Finance or what have you. But really retirement should be first. Make sure you have that foundation in place. And then you can start looking at other things like investing just because or for medium-term goals or for a house, for example. So I hope that helps, but try to pay down debt and then work on retirement are the next steps after a high yield savings account. Let's see. Second question that got submitted was from somebody with a Master of Divinity and Master of Environmental Management, and they're joining from New Haven. They said, if resources are limited, does it make better sense to prioritize paying off significant consumer debt or building up a safety net of cash reserves, 1 to 3 months living expenses, and then what priority should be given to saving for retirement? So we kind of hit on a couple of these things in the last question, but basically you need some kind of emergency fund. Otherwise, you'll end up in this like perpetual debt cycle when unexpected things happen. So if you don't have a cash cushion that you can deploy in the event of unexpected things, then you're constantly going to find yourself putting it on a credit card and then trying to pay it off and whatnot. And it's just a vicious cycle. I lived it as a kid. I know how that goes. So depending on where you live, trying to save, 1 to 3 months living expenses should really be your first priority. And you should try to tackle that super aggressively. So, cut back, like way back if you have to on, your discretionary expenses or the variable things that you do that are kind of, by choice rather than by necessity. Cut back on that stuff to get yourself an emergency fund. That alone will give you peace of mind heading into just your next days, knowing that should something happen, you have cash sitting aside ready to take care of it rather than having to rely on a credit card. And then in the meantime, don't forget about your credit card debt. Make sure that you're making payments, minimum payments at least on your credit cards. You can call your credit card company to try to negotiate lower rates so that you're not accruing as much interest over that time. And then possibly do a balance transfer to a 0% interest rate card if you qualify for one. That way you're not paying any interest on that money or on that debt while you're building a safety net. And then as far as like how you should prioritize retirement or saving for retirement along with paying down debt, kind of matters. You don't want to be 401k poor, as they say, by putting too much into your retirement accounts and then having debt or not having a safety net, because that's just not a healthy financial position for you currently, even though you may be taking care of your future self. So build your safety net. And then focus on paying off your debt kind of in balance with saving for retirement. Even little bits saving for retirement today, especially if you're really young, will pay off significantly into the future. So it's not something you want to delay. Try to put as much as you can into that to begin with while also paying off your debt. Let's see. Number 3. So they said we could say their name. This is Ryan. They are a GSAS alum from 18, and they're joining us from San Francisco. Sorry. And how do you best invest your money for the future outside of purchasing a home? So retirement. I will say that till the cows come home. So many people get to their 40s, 50s, 60s and realize that they haven't saved anywhere near enough for retirement, and then are basically panicking about how they're possibly going to ever be able to stop working. And how they're possibly going to live in retirement, without just having to rely on something like Social Security. So that to me is really where your largest priority should be. And then again, if you're taking care of retirement, maybe you already own a home, then looking into discretionary investing solutions such as buying index funds or mutual funds or ETFs through a taxable brokerage account may be the next step for you. And then let's see, number 4, and I'm just going rapid fire. So if I need to slow down, Stephanie, please let me know. This is Vanessa. She's a Yale College grad from 2008, joining us from Dallas. And she says, I'm looking to buy a home in the next few months. Do you have advice on first steps? Should I first get pre-approved? So my first thing to tell you would be to make sure that you're clear on, 1, why you want to buy a home, right? Because it is a significant investment, both financially and from a responsibility perspective. And 2, how long do you intend to live there? Unfortunately, the mortgage market, how it's currently structured, is not really friendly to short-term home ownership. And I know that because my husband's in the Navy and we move all the time. And buying homes right now without a good solution for us doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because transaction costs are so high, we would inevitably just lose a bunch of money unless the home or real estate market skyrocketed in just a couple of years, which it probably is not expected to do that. So once you've done that, make sure you're clear on why you want to buy a home and how long you plan to live there. Then work out your budget. So recommended that you don't spend any more than like 25 to 30% of your take-home pay, right? That's after taxes, on housing. And that should include maintenance and repairs, property taxes, kind of everything that is wrapped into home ownership. In terms of getting pre-approved or pre-qualified, so those are 2 different things. Getting pre-qualified is basically you give some information to a bank and they kind of give you a ballpark estimate of what you might be able to qualify for a loan. And then pre-approval would be the next step from there, which would be you submitting a lot of financial information to the bank and them essentially, checking your credit score, seeing how credit worthy you are, and giving you a more accurate estimate of how much you'll be able to get, and approving you basically for a certain amount of a loan. That is a good idea in that it makes you appear more serious to sellers. So I remember when we sold our home in Virginia, and we were first stationed there, when we were considering offers, there was somebody that had been pre-approved already for that loan amount that had given us an offer, and somebody that hadn't. And that was a better option, the pre-approved person, because we knew that there wouldn't be any financial hurdles to them actually getting the loan because they had already been pre-approved by a bank. So it's a good idea. But the last point I really want to make is that you have to be careful. The amount that the lender will approve you for is not necessarily what you can quote unquote afford. That's really just the maximum that they would be willing to lend you based on your income and your debt information. And so just because they're willing to lend you a certain amount is not them giving you their stamp of approval, like, hey, Vanessa, you can afford this amount of house. You have to figure that information out on your own. And so, even if that amount translates into a monthly payment that you can handle, you have to remember that it doesn't take things like maintenance costs or any sort of renovations you might have to make to the property over your course of ownership. It doesn't take any of that into account. And maintenance costs can generally be anywhere from like 2 to 5%, depending on how old the home is. 2 to 5% of the home's value per year. So it's pretty significant. So you have to be ready for like a water heater that breaks, right? Or an air conditioning unit, or, you find some stuff like some termite damage, or like who knows what, right? There's a lot that can happen in home ownership. So make sure, what I always tell friends is like, the bank gives you a certain amount, come in below that, right? Try to find something that's below what you're actually approved for, because you're going to feel more comfortable, right? That you can afford to make those payments, even if something happens to your current income. Maybe you change jobs, you start making less, whatever. And you're going to have a cushion that you can then deploy towards other goals. So don't just take that number for, face value. Figure out what it is that you really need and want and why, and go about purchasing a home with those things in mind. Let's see. Let's go to Aman, class of 95 from LA. And this is another real estate question. They said, should I hold on to real estate investments or sell now and invest again if and when the market drops? So my first question is like, well, when you say real estate investments, what do you mean? So do you mean your home, like what you live in? Do you mean rental properties that might be generating income for you? Or do you mean publicly traded real estate investment trusts or REITs? So the reason I'm asking that is because my answer would be very different for each one. And unfortunately, when it comes to if the market drops, that if is telling me that there's no crystal ball, and I don't have a crystal ball either. So you really have to rely on fundamentals and what your original thesis was when getting into this real estate investment in the first place. So, why did you purchase that investment? Does that reasoning still hold? Do you think that your investment is properly valued or overvalued at the time or right now? Or could it be if trends start to decline? And that's kind of how I would think about, stocks that I own is sort of the same way I would think about a piece of real estate that I own too. If the market drops, like real estate trends are so dependent on region and what's happening in those regions and the supply and demand in those regions. So I would start thinking about that and looking at trends in your area and try to make your decision based off, kind of the forecast for the area that you have this investment in. Let's see, what else did I mention that I wanted to say there? So
Tara,
yeah,
I'm gonna stop you really quick because we have a couple questions that came in through Zoom. So if these flow with what you're going to next, I'm gonna throw these out to you. So we had three on Zoom actually. We have someone who had a question about house equity as a vehicle to retirement, and then someone who would like to know your thoughts about FIRE. So that is completely foreign to me. So I'm interested to hear what that is. And then there was one other question, and I just want to say to everyone that rest assured, if we do not get to your question today, Tara and I talked about doing a little bit of a follow-up power session. So hopefully we'll be able to revisit this. But the question was, as a 22-year-old, what are the best strategies to negotiate with your credit card company for better terms? What resources should I use or read to put myself in the best position to negotiate? And those are the three things. So I'll leave it.
Gotcha. So let's talk about house or equity as a vehicle for retirement first, since it's real estate related. Personally, I'm not super sold on like the American dream of home ownership anymore. And that's me speaking as a millennial. This might be really controversial, but basically in the past, right, you were to get a job that you plan to stay at for like 30 or 40 years and stay in the same place, retire comfortably, and then the home equity that you had built over that time, you would plan to monetize in some way, either selling your home or maybe doing a reverse mortgage or something, once you entered retirement, and that would be part of your portfolio. However, the millennial generation and even later, like the younger people, I have to remind myself I'm not the youngest generation anymore, that's not how we're living, right? None of us really plan to spend 30 years in one place and build home equity over that amount of time. And so most of us are moving every like 2 to 5 years. And like I said, the mortgage market just doesn't really, it's not very friendly to us because the transaction costs are so high. So I'm thinking about it in terms of knowing family members, for example, who like have literally not saved for retirement in their 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, nothing. And all that they've done is paid down their house. And it gets you in a very precarious position because when you're ready to retire, it doesn't, like the timelines might not match up, right? You might be ready to retire, but the housing market's not very good. And so you may not be able to sell your house for as much as you wish you could. And then you won't have as much to kind of reinvest to live off of in retirement. That's the kind of things that happen when you're talking about illiquid assets like real estate, and sort of the issues that you can find yourself in is that you're not able to quickly get rid of it if you need to. Prices are really dependent on supply and demand, and personally, I don't think that's the best method. It can be part of your portfolio for retirement, absolutely, but it shouldn't be your solo option. It shouldn't be what you're hanging your retirement hat on at all, and that's just my opinion. And then let's see, I'll answer the question about credit cards now too. So to negotiate with your credit card company for better terms, basically you just need to be honest. So call them, right? Call customer service, say, hey, and be in good faith, right? Be like, I really want to pay this debt down. However, this interest rate is crushing me right now. I feel like I can't keep up with as much interest as accruing on my balance. Like, I want to make these payments. I can commit to pay X amount per month if you lower my interest by this much. Right. And it kind of, for credit card companies, kind of a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush sort of thing. It's like, I'd rather have this money now than hope that you're eventually going to be able to pay this off, instead of possibly going into bankruptcy or having to have your credit redone. So just be honest, be like, I want to pay this down. Please help me lower my rate, offer me something. Or, if there's any other fees that are associated with that card, for example, like an annual fee, try to get that removed. Basically, if you threaten to like transfer your balance or like move it away from them at all, they're usually pretty lenient with that kind of stuff. So they don't want to lose your business. So, make sure you understand, like, you're in the power position here. You are the one that's going to be making these payments, and they kind of need to work with you to make it happen. Those would be my recommendations. And then thoughts on FIRE really quickly. FIRE is interesting. So FIRE, for those of you that don't know, is financial independence / retire early. And there's been lots of articles out about, pre-corona, about, 30 or 40 somethings that have retired and now live this life, pretty meager life though, because in order to retire at that young age, your expenses need to be pretty low. I think that the idea of FIRE was very romanticized in a bull market, which means the last like 10, 11 years where we've seen significant increases in asset values. But I'm curious to see how it plays out in today's world, right? In the current climate, the economic climate, in the current market downturn, how that ends up playing out for them. Because from the retirement equation perspective, right, traditional retirement, you save for like 40 years to then retire for 20 to 30 years. So you have to fund just 20 to 30 years of retirement. If you're retiring at like 30 or 40 and you expect to live till 90, right, you now have 50 to 60 years that you have to essentially pay for. And that is just way more expensive than if you were to continue working, letting your investments compound for the next 20 or 30 years. So I personally am not trying to be, in the FIRE movement. I think for some people that are okay living very meagerly, it works out. But again, it really depends so much on market cycles that I wouldn't be comfortable doing it. Okay, so let's get back to our pre-submitted questions, but thank you all for submitting those. Those were good ones. We have a Yale College 20 grad from Virginia. So like I said, a new grad. They said, I'm a new grad. I've been looking into Roth IRAs. What should I know about starting one, and what are the limitations? The job I'm going to start has a 401k, but I've heard a Roth IRA can be good too. Thank you in advance for your help. You're welcome. So one thing I want to mention is that you can have both. So a lot of people think it's like an either or, a 1 or a 0 situation. No, you can have your cake and eat it too, as they say. So you can have a 401k at work and be contributing to that. And then you can also have an IRA, traditional, or a Roth IRA on the side, depending on what's best for you in your current tax bracket. some reasons that you should consider investing for retirement first in your 401k, so your first retirement dollars going in your 401k, would be, is there an employer match? So is your employer offering to match a certain amount of dollars or a certain percentage of the dollars that you put into your 401k? If they are, that's free money. And you should never leave free money on the table. I always liken it to, like, if you walked by a $100 bill on the sidewalk, you would pick it up, right? So there's no reason not to do the same in your retirement account. So if that's the case, if they have an employer match, then your first dollar should really be going probably to your 401k. Also, some things to consider: if they have good investment options, if they have low fees, and the other major difference between a 401k and an IRA is the contribution limit. So in a 401k, you're able to contribute, I think it's $19,500 per year, which sounds insane, but some people max out that amount. In a 401k, you're able to do that amount. In a Roth, you're only able to contribute $6,000. So depending on your retirement goals and how far along you are in your career, one of those might make more sense than the other. If, however, your 401k has a match, let's say, but the investment options that are in it are high fee, so it's costing you a lot to have your money invested there, then generally what we say is think of it like a waterfall. So fill up your retirement bucket in your 401k up to that amount of match, and then the rest of the dollars, the overflow, put it into a Roth IRA because it'll have better investment options or lower fees for you. You also have a bit more control in a Roth IRA. You can take out the funds that you contribute. I don't recommend this, but you can, without penalty and without having to, like, take a loan as you would from a 401k if you absolutely have to. Basically, my thoughts are, if there's a match, 401k money first, get up to that amount, and then evaluate if it's better to keep going in your 401k or if the overflow should be going into, like, a Roth IRA. And one other Roth IRA interesting thing to know is that there's no required minimum distributions. So with 401ks and other traditional accounts, you have to basically start taking money out by the time that you're 72. So that's mandated by the IRS. Whereas you don't have to do that in a Roth IRA. So if trying to help create generational wealth or leave something for inheritance for your children or grandchildren, for example, is something that's important to you, then a Roth IRA will actually allow you to do that because you won't be required to take money out of it when you're 72 if you don't have to. So that can be an interesting, like, generational or estate planning tool as well. Okay, so sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, Tara. We're technically, like, a little bit past our 15 minutes of finance. So I don't know if you want to do maybe one or two more questions. We got another question in Zoom and another question on Facebook, but it feels like we might need a follow-up to this 15 minutes of finance.
Yeah, I've been trying to get through the answers as fast as I can, but I'm okay.
It's impressive.
I'm okay hanging out for up to like 3:30ish or something. I do want to get to this particular question that somebody submitted because it's on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Somebody was like, I'm a new grad, and this person, class of 70 from New York City, said, I'm in my low 70s and I'm underfunded for eventual retirement. What investment strategies would you recommend? And given my natural risk aversion, what percentage might you suggest for different asset classes? So I can't give you percentages for different asset classes because I'm not your financial advisor. But my first question is, well, how far away is eventual? So if you're in your low 70s, I'm assuming you probably don't want to be working for too much longer. But there's a big difference in how you would invest if you are trying to retire in like 2 to 3 years versus if you're maybe like 5 to 10 years away from that amount or away from retiring. Some other questions are like, will you have other sources of income in retirement? Will you have Social Security? Are there any dividends? Do you have any rental income? Things like that you may have acquired along the way. But ultimately, savings percentage, your savings capacity is going to be very key. So if you have a short-term time horizon for when you want to retire, you really can't afford risk-wise to be heavily invested in stocks or other risky assets, even though the returns historically have been higher on those assets. Because if they fall, right about when you're planning to retire, as happened to a lot of people in 2008, you're going to be kind of in the same position as you're in now. So basically, you need to save more money and only rely on the market to do a small portion of the work. For somebody in your situation, I would recommend speaking to a financial advisor, specifically somebody that is a CFP or certified financial planner. They can really help you toss out exactly how much you should be saving, considering maybe other sources of income like Social Security that you might have. Let's see. Okay, and hand me the questions that we have on Zoom or Facebook. Well, I can go just one more thing. So so somebody mentioned or posted a comment.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
There we
I do
go.
just want, yeah, go ahead.
I'm muted.
Yeah, it's okay.
Sorry. All right. So we had another question about talking more about backdoor Roth IRAs. Why would you do that, and how can you maximize its value? And then there was an additional question on Facebook about home ownership and mortgages. Let's see. I'm just going to read it to you because it's a little lengthy. Home ownership with a mortgage isn't the best return on investment, but one has to live somewhere. So one has to weigh the pros and cons of rent versus buy in one's particular market. Real estate rentals as investments can have a great return on investment. Can you speak to that? As in, how much would one's portfolio would you recommend have investment real estate holdings?
Good question. So I'm totally with you on the well, you got to live somewhere sort of thing. And, everybody's like, I might as well be building equity, rather than paying a landlord. And there's some merit to both sides of that argument. Personally, I have said to my husband, I don't want to buy anything again unless it's a clear investment option. So we might live in it for the 2 years that we're stationed somewhere and then rent it out to somebody else, so it generates cash flow for us. Or it's somewhere that I intend to live for at least 6 to 10 years. And the reason for that is so that I can make sure we get a return on our investment, not lose money on transaction costs. So I do agree that having, living somewhere, buying it, and then renting it out, so long as the rental market is healthy in that region, may be a good idea and generate, not just an eventual ROI from price appreciation, but also some current income that you can put towards other goals too. The thing you always have to consider with this stuff is the opportunity cost. So a lot of people kind of overstretch themselves by buying a house that's maybe on the upper end of what they can afford. And then, there's no money left over to invest in other ways. So, if the real estate market isn't appreciating very quickly, like you said, it's not necessarily the best ROI, but you have to live somewhere. So again, that's kind of why I recommend coming in lower and maybe purchasing something that's less than you can afford, and then committing to investing that delta in at a Roth IRA or a taxable brokerage account, so that you're kind of averaging out a higher total ROI than just relying on the price appreciation of the home in the region that you live in. So in terms of percentage of your portfolio, that really depends on how risk averse you are. I think that too many people, like some family members I mentioned earlier, have way too much real estate as a part of their overall portfolio because they're not investing enough in other vehicles like a 401k or a taxable brokerage account. So when your total net worth is tied up in your house, that's way too much. You're too reliant, you're too concentrated on one asset class, which is real estate. And so, it depends. Again, it's very hard to give you a percentage, but really personally, your home should be, kind of much less, a smaller part of your pie. And things like retirement and other investment accounts should, more liquid investments for the long term should be a larger percentage of your net worth over time. That's just my thought. Was there any other question that you had?
There was the one other question about backdoor Roth IRA.
Oh, yes. All right, backdoor Roth. So for those of you that don't know, when you are basically Roth IRAs are limited income wise. So you're only able to contribute to a Roth IRA if you make under a certain amount as a single person or married filing jointly. And so for those people who make above that amount, but want to still reap the tax benefits of a Roth, which is long-term tax deferral plus no taxes in retirement, there's something called a backdoor Roth, which is essentially you taking money that you've contributed to a traditional IRA, which is pre-tax, and then converting it into a Roth IRA and paying taxes on the amount that is the balance that's in that fund, the balance in that account, converting it to a Roth IRA, paying the taxes today so you don't have to pay them in retirement. I think they're a really interesting wealth building strategy. There are a lot of kind of things you have to be careful about. So anytime that you're rolling over an IRA, whether it's, changing tax status from traditional to Roth, or simply moving, your 401k balance into an IRA, you have to be very careful that you're doing what's called a trustee to trustee transfer. So that means the money never reaches your hands. You want to make sure that it's going directly from one account into the other. That way there's no tax penalty or no early withdrawal penalty. You don't ever want that money to reach your hands. And if it does, you have to actually put it in the new account. I believe it's within 60 days. And so, life happens. You get tied up, you mean to put it into that new account within 60 days. But sometimes things happen and you forget to, and then all of a sudden you're levied with a pretty significant tax penalty. But yeah, backdoor Roth have been used by, higher income individuals for quite a while. And it's for sure a strategy that if I was still making what I made on Wall Street, I would be exploring, but I'm not. So I still fall below the income limit for a Roth IRA. So that's what I contribute to.
Thank you, Tara. We have, I think, one last question that I'd love to get in, and then we're going to call it a day and talk about maybe doing a follow-up in the near future.
30 minutes of finance.
30 minutes, 15 minutes, what difference does it make?
Okay.
We're just really glad to have you and all of these questions that have been coming in. So the last one we have for today is I graduated Yale College in 2017 and am in the technology field. I was wondering if you have an opinion on joining a pre-IPO company and how that affects savings for retirement, where part of the compensation might be in equity. Are there risks to be aware of or things to negotiate before joining?
Okay, so I'm assuming that you mean join as in becoming part of like their employee base, not investing in like a round. And maybe if you want to clarify, go ahead. But yeah, I think as we all know, right, businesses can either go up or fail. And unfortunately in the United States, the failure rate is very high. And that's, as an entrepreneur myself, it's because business is very difficult. I would say some things that you should be thinking about if you're considering joining or becoming an employee of a pre-IPO company. Definitely understand what their fundraising history has been, because if they're offering you equity at like today's current valuation, and you need to understand, like, have they had a down round in the past? Was there something negative that happened that then decreased the value of current employees' equity stakes? What are their plans? And this is a big one. What are their plans to actually monetize the equity? Because you can be in a private company for a long time and have equity in that company, but if there's never a sale of the equity, meaning an IPO if they're going public, or a sale to like a private equity shop or another investor, if there's never a way for you to exchange the private equity stake that you have for real dollars, it's just paper money. Basically, at that point, it's just value that, like, yeah, sure, your net worth is increasing, but if you can't monetize it, you can't do anything with it. So I would be, if I were joining a company like that, I would be asking them about their previous rounds, what their plans are, how they plan to monetize, and what kind of time frame they plan to do that, and also ask them what the vesting schedule is. So vesting means that basically when you receive this equity stake, it's not all yours immediately, and companies do things a little differently. The two standard ways are that they either have cliff vesting, which is where you have to work for the company for basically like 3 years or 2 or 3 years before you get any of it. And then after that time frame, you get 100% vested, meaning it's all yours, and you can kind of potentially do things with it. Or they have graduated vesting, which means that it vests over roughly like 5 or 6 years at, say, 20% per year. And so each year that you work there, you get vested a little bit more and a little bit more. But the reason that is important is because, depending on what your plans are to stay with that company, you may want to be thinking about, your tenure with them, your term with them, and how much equity you might actually leave with. And again, how would you monetize that? Those are the things I would be thinking about. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Tara. I think that's all that we have time for today, but we'll definitely talk about a follow-up. For those of you who are watching, just know that this recording will be available on alumni.yale.edu, which now has a virtual space with all of our webinars, all of our Yale Alumni Live sessions. Thank you so much for being here. If you have other questions for Tara, feel free to reach out to me through Facebook or through the Zoom chat, and hopefully we'll do a follow-up. We will be back here this Friday in Zoom on the Yale Alumni Facebook group for a behind-the-scenes tour and tasting at Kings County Distillery in Brooklyn. So make sure to join us back here for that. And again, thank you so much for joining us at Yale Alumni Live. Tara?
I just have one other thing I completely almost forgot to mention. But we had some current students or recent grads, so just graduated this year, that had asked, like, how do I learn about investing? How do I do these things? And I had mentioned right before we started that I created an online financial literacy class or course called LIT, and that I've made it available for free to current Yale students. So unfortunately, alumni, I can't support you for free too. But for current Yale students or people that just graduated in this class of 2020, you do have access to that. So I'm putting the link in the chat now so you can access that. It's finlit.yale.edu/lit, and you can sign up for a free, totally free account there. There's no selling, there's no affiliate fees, nothing. I get literally nothing but enjoyment and pleasure out of offering this to you. And so you can sign up for an account there. There's an investing 101 section module that you can learn a ton about. And then from our wonderful YA staff member, Steve Bloom, make sure to join Cross Campus. You can find me on Cross Campus at crosscampus.yale.edu if you have other follow-up questions or if you want to connect with me about anything finance or otherwise. So I guess we'll see you there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tara. We're so grateful for you lending your expertise to the entire Yale alumni community, and especially our students and just now recent grads. So thank you all for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.